My wife's friends spent months visiting our home just to tell her she deserved better than me, planting doubts, undermining our marriage, and eventually tearing us apart. The words cut deep, striking me right in the face. You're not in her league. She just sat there, silent, offering no defense. So I walked out, leaving her behind. My marriage, I never imagined it would end this way. But looking back now, as I write this, the signs were all there, leading to that final moment, when I grabbed my bags and left. My name is David, and for 8 years, I was married to Sarah, until everything crumbled. The most painful part was that it all unfolded right before her friends, individuals whose approval she valued more than protecting her own husband. Sarah and I met in college. Back then, she seemed so different from the person she became. She was kind, supportive, and we shared dreams of building a future together. But after we married and settled into our suburban home, she fell in with a group of neighborhood women who completely changed her. These women were all married to men who earned significantly more than I did. Their days were filled with shopping, lavish lunches, and conversations centered on their husbands' careers, expensive vacations, cars, and jewelry. Sarah started to compare our life to theirs, and she began acting as if she was embarrassed by me and my job as a high school teacher. Even though when we first married she said she admired my passion for helping kids learn and grow. The group included Rebecca, a lawyer's wife, Jessica, whose husband owned a restaurant, Maria, a doctor's wife, and Linda, whose husband was a real estate agent, earning massive commissions from selling luxury homes. Every Tuesday, they would gather at our house for what they called their coffee club, but it was essentially an excuse to gossip, flaunt their possessions, and subtly make each other feel inferior. Initially, Sarah tried to keep me away from these gatherings, asking me to work late or run errands when her friends were over. But I started noticing a change in her after they left. She would be quiet and moody, making comments about needing a bigger house, or suggesting I find a better paying job. When I'd ask what was wrong, she would simply say, nothing, and go to bed early. The full weight of what was happening truly hit me about 6 months ago. I came home early from school with a migraine, needing to rest. As I entered our living room, I found all 5 women, surrounded by their expensive purses and designer clothes, discussing their husbands' incomes and luxury cars. Sarah's face flushed when she saw me. She introduced me to her friends, though I'd met most of them at neighborhood parties. Rebecca gave me a dismissive glance, a clear indication I was interrupting something important, and Jessica merely nodded without truly looking at me. I greeted everyone and headed to the kitchen for water. I could hear their hushed voices, and I caught Sarah saying something about me having a rough day at work. As I walked back through the living room to go upstairs, Maria remarked, "It must be nice to have summers off like teachers do," her tone implying laziness or an easy job. I wanted to explain that teachers don't truly get summers off. We spend that time planning lessons, taking professional development courses, and many of us work second jobs to make ends meet. But Sarah quickly interjected, changing the subject to a new restaurant Jessica's husband had acquired. I went upstairs, took my medicine, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't shake the way those women looked at me, and how Sarah seemed embarrassed by my presence. After that day, things only worsened. Sarah started inviting her friends over more frequently, no longer trying to schedule their meetings around my absence. It was as if she wanted me there, so they could all witness how superior their husbands were to me. She seemed to relish the way they belittled me or completely ignored me in my own living room. The comments began subtly, but escalated over time. Rebecca would joke about how teachers probably didn't grasp business or money. Jessica would talk about her husband buying her expensive jewelry, then glance at Sarah's modest wedding ring, which was all we could afford when I proposed. Maria would mention her husband working long hours to provide for their family, as if suggesting I didn't work hard enough. And Linda would talk about their extravagant vacations, emphasizing the importance of experiencing life's finer things. Sarah never defended me during these conversations. Sometimes she would even chime in with comments about us needing to be more ambitious or wishing we could afford to do more. She started talking about how successful and driven her friends' husbands were, and she would sigh as she looked around our house, which was perfectly nice, but not as grand or luxurious as theirs. The most infuriating part was that these women would make these remarks right in front of me, as if I weren't even there, as if my feelings didn't matter. They would discuss their husbands' promotions and bonuses, all while looking at me as if I were a failure. And Sarah would nod along, seemingly agreeing with everything they said. I tried talking to Sarah about how her friends made me feel unwelcome in my own home. But she would become defensive, saying I was too sensitive, or didn't understand how women talk. She claimed her friends were just sharing their lives, and I shouldn't take everything so personally. But I knew there was more to it. I could see the knowing glances they exchanged after their subtle jabs. One day in March, the situation reached a breaking point that I still replay in my mind. I came home early from school because we had a half day for teacher conferences. I found the coffee club in full swing in our living room. They were discussing a charity gala they were all attending with their husbands, describing their expensive dresses and the significant donations their husbands were making to impress others at the event. I said hello and went to the kitchen to make myself a sandwich as I hadn't eaten lunch. I could hear them talking about me in the next room. Rebecca was saying something about how it was too bad not everyone could afford to attend events like that, and Jessica laughed, adding something about some people having different priorities in life. When I returned to the living room with my sandwich, Maria looked at me and said, "It must be nice to have such a simple life, without all the stress and responsibility that comes with a high-powered career." She said it with a smile, but her voice had an edge, and Linda nodded, remarking that some people were just meant for different kinds of work. My face grew hot, and I wanted to retort, but before I could speak, Sarah laughed and said that she sometimes wondered what it would be like to be married to someone more ambitious. She said it as if she were joking, but everyone in the room knew she was serious. Her friends exchanged knowing smiles. Rebecca then said that Sarah was such a smart and beautiful woman, and that she could probably have married anyone she wanted. She asked Sarah if she ever thought about what her life would be like if she had made different choices. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at Sarah, awaiting her answer, and I stood there, holding my sandwich, wishing I could disappear. Sarah looked at me for a long moment, then back at her friends, and said that she tried not to think about things like that because it wasn't fair to compare. But then she said that sometimes she did wonder what it would be like to be with someone who could provide more opportunities and experiences. She said that she loved me, but that sometimes she felt like we were limited in what we could do together, and her friends all nodded, as if they understood perfectly. Jessica then said that it was important for women to have partners who could match their level of ambition and sophistication, and that some people were just naturally more driven than others. Maria added that it was hard to grow as a person when you were with someone who was content with mediocrity, and Linda said that life was too short to settle for less than what you really wanted. I stood there, listening to my wife and her friends discuss me as if I were a charity case or a burden, and something inside me shattered, something I don't think ever healed. Sarah looked at me again, and I could see in her eyes that she meant every word, that she had likely been harboring these thoughts for a long time without telling me. I set my sandwich down on the coffee table and said that I needed to go run some errands, and I left the house without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove for 2 hours, replaying everything that had happened, trying to comprehend when my wife had stopped respecting me and started seeing me as something to be ashamed of. When I got home that evening, Sarah's friends were gone, and she was in the kitchen making dinner, as if nothing had happened. I asked if we could talk, and she agreed. I told her I had heard what she said about wondering what her life would be like with someone else, and how she felt limited by being married to me. Sarah immediately grew defensive, claiming I was taking everything out of context, and that she was just making conversation with her friends. She said that women talk about hypothetical situations all the time and that it didn't mean anything. But I could tell by the way she avoided my gaze that she knew she had crossed a line. I told her it wasn't just about what she said that day, but about how she had been treating me for months in front of her friends, and how she never defended me when they made their subtle remarks about my job or our lifestyle. I said that I felt like she was ashamed of me and that she would rather be married to someone. Their subtle remarks about my job or our lifestyle. I said that I felt like she was ashamed of me and that she would rather be married to someone like Rebecca's husband or Jessica's husband, who could buy her expensive things and take her to fancy events. Sarah started crying and said that wasn't true. But then she admitted that she did sometimes feel frustrated that we couldn't do all the things her friends could do with their husbands. She said that she felt left out when they talked about their vacations and shopping trips and fancy dinners, and that she wished we had more money so we could experience those things too. I told her that I understood she wanted nice things and experiences, but that the way she was handling her feelings was destroying our marriage. I said that her friends were using her insecurities to make themselves feel better about their own lives, and that she was letting them turn her against me instead of talking to me directly about what she wanted. Sarah said that her friends were just successful women who understood what it meant to have high standards, and that maybe I should be more motivated to improve our situation instead of being satisfied with where we were. She said that all of her friends' husbands had worked hard to get where they were, and that maybe I needed to push myself more instead of just accepting that teaching was all I would ever do. That conversation stretched for hours, growing more and more heated as we both uttered words we couldn't retract. Sarah continued defending her friends, insisting they were just trying to encourage her to aspire to more in life, while I repeatedly tried to explain that they were actually encouraging her to desire less of me. The next few weeks were fraught with tension and awkwardness, as we both tried to maintain a facade of normalcy. But I could feel Sarah pulling away from me more and more. She started spending even more time with her friends, returning home with tales of their husbands' latest achievements and purchases, recounting these stories in a way that clearly highlighted the disparities between their lives and ours. The Tuesday coffee club meetings continued, and I began staying late at school or going to the gym to avoid being home when her friends were there. But sometimes, I would arrive home while they were still present, and I would overhear them discussing me in the kitchen or living room. They would comment on how stressed or tired I seemed, and suggest that perhaps Sarah needed to find ways to motivate me to be more successful. One evening in April, I came home from a faculty meeting to find Sarah sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of real estate flyers and brochures for expensive cars and vacation destinations. She said that Linda had given her some information about different ways we could improve our lifestyle, and she wanted to discuss making some changes to our financial situation. I looked through the materials and realized that everything she was showing me required us to spend money we didn't have, or take on debt we couldn't afford on my teacher's salary. Sarah suggested that maybe it was time for me to look into other career options that would pay better, or that maybe I could get a second job so we could start living more like her friends. I told her that I loved teaching, that I was good at it, and that I didn't want to leave a job where I felt I was making a difference just so we could buy expensive things to impress her friends. I said that if she wanted more money, then perhaps she should look into getting a job herself, instead of spending her days shopping and having coffee with women who spent their time making other people feel bad about their lives. Sarah grew angry, stating that her friends' husbands didn't expect their wives to work because they made enough money to support their families comfortably. She said that it wasn't fair for me to expect her to get a job when I was the one who couldn't provide the kind of lifestyle that successful couples had, and that maybe the problem was that I lacked ambition, rather than that she had unrealistic expectations. That fight raged until almost midnight, and by the end of it, we were both uttering words designed to inflict maximum hurt. Sarah insisted she was tired of feeling embarrassed when her friends discussed their lives because she had nothing comparable to share. I retorted that I was tired of feeling like a disappointment in my own home, because I couldn't compete with men who had completely different careers and priorities. The next morning, we barely spoke. I could feel that something fundamental had shifted between us. Sarah seemed to have made up her mind about something, and she started acting as if she was just waiting for the right moment to voice her thoughts. That moment arrived the following Tuesday. I came home early from school because one of my students had been in a car accident, and I was too shaken to finish teaching my afternoon classes. I walked into our house and found the coffee club in session, as usual, but this time they stopped talking when they saw me. I could tell they had been discussing something serious. I said hello and started to go upstairs, but Rebecca called out, asking me to come back because they wanted to talk to me about something. I knew from the tone of her voice that whatever they wanted to say wouldn't be pleasant, but I returned to the living room and stood near the doorway. Rebecca looked at the other women, then at me, and said that they had all been discussing Sarah's situation, and that they were concerned about her happiness. She stated that Sarah was such a wonderful woman who deserved to have a partner who could match her intelligence and potential, and that they felt like she was being held back from reaching her full potential. Jessica interjected, saying they had all noticed how unhappy Sarah seemed lately, and that it was obvious she was struggling with feeling unfulfilled in her marriage. She said that Sarah was too loyal and kind to say anything directly, but that it was clear to everyone who knew her that she needed more from a relationship than what she was currently getting. Maria then added that they had been encouraging Sarah to think seriously about what she wanted out of life, and that maybe it was time for her to consider whether she was with the right person for her future goals and dreams. She said that sometimes people grew in different directions, and that it wasn't anyone's fault, but that it was important to be honest about when a relationship wasn't working anymore. Linda nodded and said that Sarah was still young and beautiful, and intelligent, and that she shouldn't waste her best years with someone who couldn't give her the kind of life she deserved. She said that Sarah's friends all wanted what was best for her, and that sometimes that meant making difficult decisions about relationships that weren't serving both people involved. I looked at Sarah throughout this entire monologue. She was sitting on our couch, looking down at her hands, offering no defense of me, nor telling her friends they were out of line for speaking to me like this in my own home. I waited for her to speak up, to tell them to stop, but she just sat there silently while her friends told me I wasn't good enough for my own wife. Finally, I asked Sarah if this was how she felt too, if she agreed with what her friends were saying about our marriage. She looked up at me and said that she didn't know how to answer that question, but that she had been thinking a lot about whether we wanted the same things out of life. Rebecca then stated that Sarah had been confiding in them about how trapped she felt in a marriage where she couldn't grow or experience the things she wanted to experience. She said that Sarah was too nice to hurt my feelings by saying it directly, but that she had told them she sometimes felt like she had settled for less than what she really wanted when she married me. I felt as if I had been punched. I looked at Sarah and asked if she had really said those things to her friends. Sarah started crying and said that she had been confused and frustrated, and that she had said some things she probably shouldn't have said, but that her feelings were complicated, and she didn't know how to sort them out. Jessica then said that Sarah deserved to be with someone who was in her league intellectually, and that it wasn't fair to either of us to stay in a marriage where one person felt like they were settling. She said that Sarah was an educated woman with so much potential, and that she needed a partner who could challenge her and provide opportunities for growth, rather than someone who was content with a simple life. That phrase, "in her league," struck me like a physical blow. I realized this was the culmination of all those months of comments and conversations. Sarah's friends had convinced her that she was too good for me, that I was holding her back from some better life she deserved with a more successful man. I asked Sarah directly if she thought I was below her league, and if that was truly how she viewed our marriage. The room fell completely silent. Everyone looked at Sarah, awaiting her answer, and I could see her struggling with what to say. Finally, Sarah looked at me and said that she didn't think of it in terms of leagues, but that she did sometimes feel like we were at different places in our lives, and that maybe we wanted different things for our future. She said that her friends had helped her realize that it was okay to want more out of life, and that maybe we had both changed since we got married in ways that made us less compatible. Rebecca nodded and said that it was nobody's fault when two people grew apart, but that it was important to be honest about when a relationship had run its course. She said that Sarah was young enough to start over and find someone who could give her the kind of life she really wanted, and that I deserved to be with someone who appreciated the kind of person I was, instead of wishing I was different. I stood there, listening to these women dissect my marriage as if it were a failing business venture. I realized Sarah had already made her decision. She had chosen her friends' opinions over our relationship, and she had allowed them to convince her that I was some sort of burden or impediment to her happiness. I informed everyone in the room that I had heard enough, and that I didn't need to listen to a group of women tell me I wasn't good enough for my own wife in my own living room. I said that if Sarah felt she had settled for less than she deserved when she married me, then perhaps we needed to have a serious conversation about what that meant for our future. Sarah's friends exchanged satisfied glances, as if they had achieved their objective. Rebecca remarked that sometimes the truth was hard to hear, but that it was better to face reality than to live in denial. Jessica added that they were just trying to help Sarah figure out what would make her truly happy, and Maria said that they all cared about Sarah too much to watch her waste her life being unfulfilled. I looked at Sarah one last time and asked her if she wanted me to leave so she could continue discussing our marriage with her friends, or if she wanted her friends to leave so we could talk privately about what was happening between us. Sarah looked back and forth between me and her friends, then said that maybe it would be better if I gave her some time to think about everything. That was the moment I knew our marriage was over, because she had chosen to ask me to leave instead of asking her friends to mind their own business. I went upstairs and packed a bag with enough clothes for a few days. I could hear the women downstairs talking in hushed voices about what had just transpired. When I came back downstairs with my bag, Sarah was standing in the hallway, looking confused and upset. I told her I was going to stay at my brother's house for a while so she could have all the time she needed to think about what she wanted, and that when she was ready to talk, we could figure out what came next. Sarah started to say something, but I held up my hand and told her that I didn't want to hear any more about how I wasn't good enough, or how she felt trapped in our marriage. I said that if she truly believed what her friends had been telling her, then we both deserved better than trying to make a relationship work when one person thought the other person was beneath them. I walked past the living room where her friends were still sitting. I could see them watching everything unfold with keen interest, as if enjoying the drama they had created. Rebecca called out, saying she hoped I understood they were just trying to help. I stopped and turned around, telling her that destroying someone's marriage wasn't helping anyone. I told all of them that they had spent months coming into my home and making me feel unwelcome and inadequate, and that they had turned my wife against me by convincing her that she deserved better than what we had built together. I said that they were the kind of people who couldn't be happy unless they were making other people feel bad about their lives, and that I felt sorry for their husbands who had to live with women who were never satisfied with what they had. Linda started to retort, but I was already walking toward the door, and I told them that they had gotten what they wanted, and that they could all pat themselves on the back by breaking up a marriage. I said that I hoped Sarah's new life with someone more worthy of her would make them all feel better about their own problems. I left the house and drove to my brother Tom's apartment. I spent the next 3 days trying to process what had happened and decide my next steps. Tom was furious when I recounted the entire story. He said that Sarah's friends sounded like toxic people who enjoyed creating drama in other people's lives. Tom also mentioned that he had never liked the way Sarah changed after she started spending time with those women, and that he had noticed, at family gatherings, how she seemed embarrassed by our modest lifestyle compared to her friends' situations. He said that a good wife would have defended her husband instead of letting her friends attack him, and that Sarah had shown her true character by choosing their opinions over our marriage. I called Sarah several times during those 3 days, but she didn't answer. When I finally reached her, she said that she needed more time to think and that she wasn't ready to talk yet. I asked her if her friends were still coming over and giving her advice about our marriage, and she got defensive, saying that she needed to talk to people who cared about her happiness. That conversation made it clear to me that Sarah wasn't planning to fight for our marriage or tell her friends to stay out of our business. She was going to let them continue influencing her decisions about our future. I realized that even if we worked things out temporarily, this same situation would keep recurring as long as she valued her friends' opinions more than our relationship. I spent the next week reflecting on all the good times Sarah and I had shared during our 8 years together, trying to figure out if there was any way to save our marriage. I thought about the woman I had fallen in love with in college, who had supported my dreams of becoming a teacher. I wondered when she had started seeing my career as something to be ashamed of instead of something to be proud of. But every time I considered trying to reconcile, I remembered the way Sarah had sat silently while her friends told me I wasn't good enough for her, and the way she had asked me to leave instead of asking them to leave. I realized that the woman I had married was gone, and that the person she had become under her friend's influence wasn't someone I could build a life with. I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer recommended by a colleague at school. I spent 2 hours detailing everything that had happened over the past several months. The lawyer stated that what I was describing sounded like emotional abuse, and that Sarah's friends had essentially conducted a campaign to undermine my marriage and my self-esteem. He explained that while we didn't have children or significant assets to divide, I would still need to go through the legal process of filing for divorce and serving Sarah with papers. He said that based on what I had told him, it sounded like Sarah might not contest the divorce since she had already expressed that she felt unfulfilled in our marriage. I signed the papers that afternoon, and the lawyer said he would have them served to Sarah within the next few days. When Sarah received the divorce papers, she called me immediately, crying and asking why I hadn't tried to work things out before taking such a drastic step. I told her that she had made it clear where she stood when she chose to discuss our marriage problems with her friends instead of with me, and when she had agreed with them that I wasn't good enough for her. Sarah said that she had never meant for things to go so far, and that she had just been confused about what she wanted. But I told her that the damage was already done. I said that I couldn't be married to someone who saw me as settling for less than she deserved, and that I couldn't live in a house where I was constantly made to feel inadequate by her friends. She asked if we could go to counseling or try to work things out, but I told her that the problems in our marriage weren't the kind that counseling could fix. I said that the issue wasn't communication or misunderstandings, but that she had fundamentally lost respect for me and had allowed other people to convince her that our life together wasn't good enough. Sarah then said that her friends had been trying to help her figure out why she was feeling unhappy, and that maybe they had given her bad advice, but that didn't mean our marriage had to end. I told her that good friends would have encouraged her to talk to her husband about her feelings, instead of encouraging her to think about what her life would be like with someone else. I explained that her friends had spent months making me feel unwelcome in my own home and undermining our relationship, and that she had participated in that process instead of stopping it. I said that a marriage couldn't survive when one person allowed outsiders to attack and belittle their spouse, and that I deserved better than what our relationship had become. The divorce process took about 8 months to complete, as we had to divide our shared assets and decide what to do with our house. Sarah ended up buying out my half of the house with money her parents lent her, and I used my portion of the equity to make a down payment on a small condo closer to the school where I taught. During those 8 months, I had very little contact with Sarah, except through our lawyers. However, I heard from mutual friends that she was still spending time with her coffee club friends, and that they were helping her through the divorce process. Some of these friends told me that Sarah seemed relieved that the marriage was ending, which confirmed that I had made the right decision. I also heard that Rebecca had made comments about how Sarah was better off without someone who couldn't appreciate her worth, and that Jessica had said Sarah would have no trouble finding someone more suitable once she was ready to date again. These comments didn't surprise me, because I knew that Sarah's friends were probably congratulating themselves on successfully breaking up our marriage. I moved into my new condo and began rebuilding my life as a single person. I was surprised by how much happier I felt once I was away from the constant negativity and judgment that had overshadowed my marriage. I realized that I had spent months walking on eggshells and trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't good enough, and that it felt good to be in a space where I could simply be myself. About 12 months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Maria at the grocery store. She acted as if we were old friends who hadn't seen each other in a while. She asked how I was doing and said that she hoped there were no hard feelings about everything that had happened. She seemed genuinely surprised when I didn't respond with enthusiasm. I told Maria that I held her and her friends responsible for destroying my marriage, and that I thought they were manipulative people who enjoyed creating problems in other people's lives. She grew defensive, saying that they had only been trying to help Sarah figure out what would make her happy, and that it wasn't their fault if our marriage had problems. I said that our marriage had normal problems that couples work through together, but that her group had turned those problems into reasons why Sarah should leave me for someone better. I told her that they had spent months making me feel unwelcome in my own home and convincing my wife that she had settled for less than she deserved, and that their behavior had been cruel and destructive. Maria said that Sarah had been the one who came to them with complaints about our marriage, and that they had just listened and offered support like good friends should do. I told her that good friends would have encouraged Sarah to communicate with her husband and work on their problems together, not encouraged her to think about what her life would be like with someone else. That conversation ended with Maria walking away in a huff, and I felt good about finally telling one of those women exactly what I thought of their behavior. I knew that they probably all got together later and discussed what a bitter person I was. But I didn't care, because I was done trying to win their approval or prove that I was good enough. About a year after our divorce, I heard through mutual friends that Sarah had started dating someone new, and that her friends were very excited about him because he was a successful businessman who could provide her with the kind of lifestyle they thought she deserved. I felt a little sad when I heard this news, but I also heard that Sarah's new boyfriend didn't particularly like her friends, and that he thought they were too involved in her personal life. This made me smile, because I knew that Sarah would eventually have to choose between keeping her friends happy and keeping her new relationship healthy. I hoped, for her sake, that she would make a better choice the second time around. In the end, Sarah's friends were right about one thing. We weren't in the same league. But they were wrong about which one of us was settling for less than we deserved.